Officer Ramirez was sitting in the monitoring room at the police station reviewing routine security camera footage when he paused the video at 2:13 in the morning, and what he saw on the screen made him lean closer with his brow furrowed because the image showed the interior of a closed convenience store where all the lights were off except for the glow from the refrigerators in the back. And in the center frame near the counter, there was an object that definitely hadn't been there when the owner locked up 6 hours earlier. It was a small wooden chair of the type used in family dining rooms, placed perfectly in the center of aisle 3. And the strange thing wasn't that the chair was there, but that in the recording from 30 seconds before, the aisle had been completely empty, with no indication that anything was about to appear. And then in the next frame, the chair simply existed, as if it had always been there, without any visible movement to explain its arrival or any shadow crossing through the camera's field of view. Nothing in that room should have been able to move. The convenience store sat on the corner of 5th and Madison in a quiet residential neighborhood where most of the action happened between 7 in the morning and 9 at night, and the owner, Mr. Chen, had run the place for 12 years without incident, keeping regular hours and knowing most of his customers by name. Officer Ramirez had been on the night shift for 3 years now, one of those assignments that becomes routine quickly, with most nights passing in quiet surveillance of camera feeds from local businesses that paid for the police monitoring service. And he'd watched this particular store's footage hundreds of times without ever seeing anything more unusual than teenagers loitering near the ice cream freezer or the occasional customer forgetting to pay for a candy bar. The store itself was small and organized, with 5 aisles of basic goods, a counter near the front with lottery tickets and cigarettes behind plexiglass, and a back room where Mr. Chen kept inventory and took his lunch breaks during slow afternoon hours. Ramirez knew the layout by heart at this point, could identify every shelf and product placement from the grainy night vision footage, and that's exactly why the chair stood out so starkly, because it didn't belong to the store's inventory and had no business being there. But something in that footage felt slightly off. The motion sensors had triggered at exactly 2:11 and 47 seconds in the morning, which was unusual because Mr. Chen's store used a commercial-grade system that was calibrated to ignore small movements like rats or shifting products, and the alert had pinged Ramirez's computer with a red notification that indicated significant movement detected in aisle 3. He'd pulled up the live feed immediately, expecting to see a break-in or perhaps a homeless person who'd hidden in the store before closing, but the camera showed nothing moving, just empty aisles bathed in the dim green glow of emergency lighting and the soft blue from the refrigerator cases. He'd made a note in the log, marked it as a possible sensor malfunction, and continued with his other monitoring duties. But 17 minutes later, the same sensor triggered again in the exact same location, and this time when he checked the playback, he noticed something that made his skin prickle with unease. There was a faint change in the lighting near the end of aisle 3, a barely perceptible shift in the shadows, as if something had passed between the camera and the light source, but no object or person was visible in any frame he reviewed. He increased the playback speed, watching the timestamp tick forward, and that's when he saw it appear. And then it happened again, only louder. At 2:13 and 12 seconds, the chair materialized in the center of aisle 3 without any visible cause or movement preceding its appearance, and Ramirez found himself staring at the screen with his coffee cup frozen halfway to his mouth, because this wasn't a glitch or a corrupted file. This was a solid object that now existed in a space that had been verifiably empty moments before. He rewound the footage 3 times, watching the same sequence play out, with the aisle empty at 2:13 and 8 seconds, then a single frame of what looked like visual distortion or interference, and then the chair fully formed and stationary at 2:13 and 12 seconds, as if it had been dropped there by invisible hands. The chair itself was unremarkable. Plain wood with a straight back and 4 legs, the kind you might find at a yard sale or in someone's basement. But its presence in that locked store in the middle of the night defied every logical explanation he could generate in those first confused moments of discovery. He checked the timestamp again to make sure he wasn't looking at old footage somehow spliced into the current feed, but the date and time were correct, matching exactly with the motion sensor alert that had originally drawn his attention. And the footage didn't match what reality should have shown. Ramirez exported the clip to his desktop and opened it in the department's video analysis software, the kind that allowed frame-by-frame examination and enhancement of specific areas within the image, and he began the methodical process of studying every single frame between 2:13 and 0 seconds and 2:13 and 15 seconds. At 2:13 and 9 seconds, aisle 3 showed the normal arrangement of products, with potato chip bags hanging on the left side, canned goods stacked on the right, and the worn linoleum floor reflecting the dim overhead emergency lights in familiar patterns he'd seen countless times before. At 2:13 and 10 seconds, there was a visible distortion in the center of the frame, a kind of visual static or blur that lasted for exactly 1 frame, less than a 30th of a second, as if the camera had briefly lost focus or encountered some kind of electromagnetic interference. At 2:13 and 11 seconds, the distortion intensified slightly, becoming more pronounced but still not revealing any recognizable shape or form that would explain what was happening in that physical space. And then, at 2:13 and 12 seconds, the chair was there, complete and solid, with its 4 legs planted firmly on the floor and its shadow stretching back toward the refrigerators in a way that matched the existing light sources perfectly. At the 0:41 mark, something shifts. Ramirez spent the next 40 minutes running through every possible technical explanation he could think of, starting with the camera system itself and whether there might be a malfunction in the recording equipment or storage server that could create this kind of visual artifact. He checked the system logs and found no errors, no dropped frames, no indication of hardware failure or software corruption during the time period in question, and the metadata embedded in the video file confirmed that it was recorded continuously without any gaps or edits that might suggest tampering. He called the security company that maintained Mr. Chen's system and spoke with the technician who walked him through additional diagnostic checks, examining the camera's firmware version, the network connection stability, and the cloud backup timestamps. But everything came back normal, with no red flags that would explain a chair appearing out of thin air. The technician suggested it might be a case of someone placing the chair there before closing and the earlier footage somehow not capturing it. But Ramirez had already reviewed the entire evening's recording from 6 p.m. when Mr. Chen locked up until 2:13 a.m., and the chair simply wasn't present in any frame until it suddenly was. He even considered the possibility of someone breaking in through a back entrance not covered by cameras, placing the chair and leaving without triggering any other sensors, but the store's alarm system showed no breaches, and all doors remained sealed throughout the night. But the timeline didn't make sense. Going back through the footage one more time with fresh eyes and heightened attention to detail, Ramirez noticed something he'd missed in his initial reviews: a subtle change in the ambient sound captured by the camera's audio system that occurred at exactly 2:13 and 10 seconds. The normal background hum of the refrigerators and the faint buzz of the emergency lighting was interrupted by a brief low-frequency sound, almost subsonic, that lasted for approximately 2 seconds before returning to the baseline audio environment. And when he isolated this sound and increased the volume through his headphones, it had an unsettling quality that he couldn't quite classify as mechanical or organic. He enhanced the visual frames around the same timestamp and noticed that the distortion he'd seen earlier wasn't random or chaotic, but seemed to have a center point, a focal area in 3-dimensional space where the blurring was most intense.
and this focal point was located exactly where the chair's seat would materialize 2 frames later. The chair itself, upon closer examination, showed signs of age and use, with small scratches on the legs and a slightly worn finish on the seat, suggesting it was a real physical object with history and not some kind of projection or hologram. And yet there was absolutely no explanation for how it arrived in that location without being carried, pushed, or otherwise moved by a visible force. What it reached for is still unknown. At 6:45 that morning, when Mr. Chen arrived to open his store, Officer Ramirez was waiting in the parking lot with his patrol car and a growing sense that he needed to see the physical space for himself before filing any kind of official report about what the footage showed. They entered together through the front door, and Ramirez walked directly to aisle 3 with Mr. Chen following close behind, asking questions in rapid-fire Mandarin-accented English about why a police officer was interested in his store at this hour. And when they reached the location where the chair had appeared on camera, they found it still there, exactly as the footage had shown, sitting in the center of the aisle with its back facing the front of the store. Mr. Chen stopped walking and stared at the chair with an expression that Ramirez immediately recognized as genuine confusion and concern. And he said in a quiet voice that made the moment feel even more surreal, "That's not mine. I've never seen that chair before. It wasn't here when I closed last night." Ramirez asked if anyone else had keys to the store, if there were any back entrances or ways someone could have gotten inside without triggering the alarm system. But Mr. Chen shook his head, insisting that only he and his wife had keys, and that all the doors and windows showed no signs of forced entry when he'd done his security check just minutes before. The chair sat there between them like a question that had no answer. And when Ramirez bent down to examine it more closely, he noticed something wedged under one of the back legs, a small folded piece of paper that hadn't been visible in the security footage. Who? In the days that followed, Officer Ramirez found himself returning to the footage repeatedly during his night shifts, watching those crucial 15 seconds over and over, as if repetition might reveal some detail he'd missed or some logical explanation that would make the whole incident less unsettling than it felt. The chair had been removed from Mr. Chen's store and was now sitting in the police station's evidence room, tagged and cataloged as item number 2847B. And the paper that had been wedged under its leg turned out to be a shopping list written in faded pencil, with items like milk, bread, eggs, butter, in handwriting that the forensics team couldn't match to any database or known person. Mr. Chen had become noticeably more anxious about closing his store alone at night, and had started asking his wife to stay with him until he finished locking up. And he'd called Ramirez twice to report additional motion sensor alerts that turned out to be nothing but shadows and the normal settling sounds of an old building. The story had started to spread among the other officers on the night shift, passed along in quiet conversations during shift changes and coffee breaks, and Ramirez noticed that several of his colleagues had started reviewing their own assigned camera feeds with more attention than usual, as if expecting to find their own inexplicable anomalies hiding in the mundane footage of closed businesses and empty parking lots. Their sense of routine surveillance hasn't felt the same since.
The official report that Ramirez eventually filed classified the incident as unexplained equipment malfunction with possible evidence tampering, a deliberately vague description that satisfied his superior's need for closure without actually explaining anything about what had occurred. He'd consulted with the security company's senior technicians, who suggested that perhaps the chair had been in the store all along and some kind of rendering error in the video compression algorithm had made it invisible in earlier frames, before suddenly displaying correctly. But this theory fell apart when confronted with the fact that Mr. Chen absolutely insisted the chair had not been present when he locked up, and that its appearance was as much a surprise to him as it was to anyone watching the footage. Some of Ramirez's colleagues suggested more exotic explanations involving time distortions or quantum uncertainty, half-joking references to science fiction concepts that felt less absurd when you were actually looking at footage of an object materializing without cause. But none of these theories could be tested or verified in any meaningful way that would satisfy a police report or a court of law. The chair itself offered no clues beyond its physical existence, with no fingerprints found on its surface and no identifying marks or manufacturer labels that might trace its origin or explain how it ended up in that specific location on that specific night. Some answers never appear on camera. Officer Ramirez still works the night shift at the same monitoring station, still watches the same grid of security camera feeds from local businesses that pay for police surveillance, but he approaches the work differently now, with a heightened awareness that the mundane footage scrolling across his screens might contain moments that defy explanation. He's learned that not every mystery needs to be solved, and that some incidents exist in a space between documented fact and comfortable understanding, and perhaps that ambiguity is something police work doesn't prepare you for, because the job is supposed to be about finding answers and establishing what happened with certainty and evidence. The chair remains in the evidence room, gathering dust alongside other unclaimed or unexplained items that don't fit into any open investigation. And sometimes, when Ramirez passes by storage on his way to other duties, he thinks about that night and wonders if there are other moments like it happening all the time in places we're not watching. Ordinary spaces where the rules we rely on to make sense of reality occasionally bend or break in ways too subtle for most people to notice. He's become more comfortable with not knowing, with accepting that some events will remain unexplained no matter how many times you review the footage or how thoroughly you investigate the circumstances. And maybe that's what working nights teaches you eventually, that the world contains more mystery than we acknowledge during daylight hours, when everything seems ordered and rational and under control. Sometimes, the quiet moments are the loudest. If you've ever wondered what your security cameras might be recording in the hours when no one's watching, or if you've encountered something in your own work or daily life that resisted every attempt at logical explanation, share your thoughts below. And for more real-life quiet incidents that exist in that uncomfortable space between the documented and the inexplicable, consider subscribing.